traveling along with the vice president because I figured they must be lonely because Kamala Harris doesn't take any questions. And I want to just point this out before we let the media ask me some questions, that I think it's really disgraceful, both for Kamala Harris, but also for a lot of the American media that participates in this stuff, to have a person who has been the presumptive nominee of the Democrat Party for 17 days and refuses to take a single question from the American media. Now, it's well known, of course, that President Trump and I will go anywhere, we'll answer any question because we respect the American people enough to actually ask them for their vote rather than sit in front of a teleprompter, read scripted lines, and run away from every reporter and every actual citizen who's going to decide this election. I think it's a scandal, and I think the vice president should be ashamed of herself. So hopefully our reporters out there in the audience will start doing their job a little bit and going and demanding that Kamala Harris actually answer to the American people. And what should she answer for? And I think it's an important thing to point out here before I kick it over to you guys for some questions. Well, one thing she should answer for, we're in a great American manufacturing facility here, and I appreciate y'all showing up and standing behind me. But one thing we know is that you cannot manufacture in this country unless you have access to low-cost power. And we happen to be sitting on the Saudi Arabia of natural gas in this country. We happen to have unlimited oil and gas resources right here in the United States of America, and yet Kamala Harris would rather get energy from tin-pot dictators in Iran and Russia than from American citizens and American workers. And not only is that driving up the cost of power for hardworking American families, it's also making it harder and harder to manufacture right here in the United States of America. And I'm one of these guys who believes that it's important that we make more things right here in the USA. We ought to make more of our own pharmaceuticals. We ought to make more of our own manufactured goods. We ought to make more of our own food. We have to be self-sufficient as a people. And if we're not self-sufficient, then it's going to allow the communist Chinese to run all over us. And that's exactly what they've been doing under the Harris administration. The other thing that Kamala Harris ought to answer for is this terrible crisis at the American southern border. She has been the border czar for 3.5 years, and Americans have suffered because of it. I know this community's been affected by it. I know I've seen the consequences of it personally, but the fentanyl that the Mexican drug cartels are bringing into our country, it is killing Americans by the bushels, and it is unnecessary. It is happening because of failed public policy. I talked to somebody just yesterday, actually, two kids, a 19-year-old boy and a 15-year-old girl. And their mom and dad had died of a fentanyl overdose just 5 years prior when they were 10 and 14 years old. These two kids were orphaned. And they're incredible kids. And I told them I was rooting for them. And I can't believe that our leadership has let what has happened to these children happen. It's not necessary. There's no American that wants the Mexican drug cartels to take advantage of our country and make billions of dollars selling drugs into our communities. And these kids suffered because of it. You have a little girl who's bounced around 4 foster homes in just the past 4 years because of the poison that took her parents from her. And you ask yourselves, why are we doing this? Why are we letting this stuff come into our country? I know very personally the pain of addiction. Some of you saw my RNC remarks, but my mom struggled with addiction for pretty much my entire life. And she's been clean and sober for nearly 10 years now, and that's an incredible blessing for my family, an incredible blessing for my kids to be able to get to know their grandmother. But I really believe that if the poison that Kamala Harris is letting come across the border in 2024 was coming across the border 15 years ago or 12 years ago, I would have never got that second chance with my mom. And we would have never had the opportunity to see her build a wonderful relationship with her 3 grandchildren. And if this campaign of Donald Trump's and mine is about anything, it's about preserving the American dream, and the American dream is sometimes a thing of second chances. We want moms and dads to recover from addiction and get another chance with their kids. We want kids who come from a poor family to be able to stand here and run for Vice President of the United States because it's the greatest country in the world, and we are proud of it, and it provides incredible bounty and incredible opportunity to our people. We want kids who grew up in low-income families to be able to walk outside and walk down the street without being afraid of a violent crime, because violent crime has skyrocketed under the Harris administration. We want police officers to be able to do their job and maybe receive a thank you from their federal government, and not a federal government that makes their job more and more difficult. And in all these areas, we have a country that's going in the wrong direction thanks to Kamala Harris. And I think that it's important to say we could be doing so much better. And not just that we could be doing so much better, we were doing so much better when Donald J. Trump was president of the United States. We had somebody who was fighting for American manufacturing, American workers, and fighting for their jobs. We had somebody who was empowering our police and making it easier for them to do their jobs. We had somebody who was stopping the flow of fentanyl and stopping the Mexican drug cartels from taking advantage of our country. And we had somebody who was pursuing the kind of economic policies where you could build a life in your home without having groceries become unaffordable, without having housing become unaffordable. The most consistent complaint that I hear from people all across the country, and I've been to more than a dozen states, I think, since Donald Trump tapped me, the most consistent complaint that I hear is that it is harder and harder for normal people to get by. And I happen to think that if you work hard and play by the rules in this country, you ought to be entitled to a good life in the country that your grandparents built. It's a very simple goal, and it's something that we can get for everybody. Now, is that possible? Thanks to Kamala Harris, grocery prices are up 30% since she took office. Gas prices are up 50% since she took office. Rent is over 40% since she took office. Every single thing that Americans need to buy in order to live a halfway decent life has become more expensive because of Kamala Harris's economic policies. And instead of saying, I'm sorry, instead of saying, maybe, we should go in a different direction, she's running from the media, refusing to answer tough questions, and hoping that a basement campaign is going to earn her a promotion. And I think we ought to say to Kamala Harris, you are fired. Your policies didn't work, your agenda doesn't work, and it's not what the American people want. So let me just recap it here, and then I will turn it over to the media. On day one, Kamala Harris suspended deportations. On day one, Kamala Harris stopped deportations for the American people. On day one, Kamala Harris refused to continue construction of the Trump border wall. On day one, Kamala Harris basically refused to push back against the drug cartels in this country. And on day one, Kamala Harris said that she was going to decriminalize illegal aliens, and she did all of those things. Now, the American people have suffered the consequences because of it. On day one, Kamala Harris became the border czar, and ever since then, we've had a wide open southern border. Now, it's not just what she's done on day one, it's what she's done ever since then. She cast the deciding vote for the so-called Inflation Reduction Act that sent a lot of our resources to China and sent interest rates through the roof. She cast the deciding vote for the very policies that made groceries and gas and housing less affordable for American citizens. And I think it's very simple. I think that we can do better. I know that we can do better. We were doing better when Donald J. Trump was president. So thank you all for being here. Thanks for standing in support of our president. And to all the American people out there who are listening to these remarks or will hear them on TV just a little bit later, my very simple request is to think about people who are suffering in this country. Think about kids who lost a parent to an opioid overdose. Think about families like mine who can't afford groceries when they go up by 30%. Think about families that are struggling because the mom and the dad can't get a good job because Kamala Harris would rather build the Chinese middle class than the American middle class. Those people could be doing so much better, and they will, so long as Donald Trump becomes president. My final comment I'll say is, it says on our national currency, "In God we trust." That is the motto of the United States of America. I believe that God calls us to hope and not to despair. And I really do hope for this country and believe that this country's best days are ahead of it. But the most important thing that we can do to give people all across this country hope is to get them a government that actually works for American citizens, and that's by electing Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. Thank you all, and God bless you. Appreciate it. And what I'd like to do here, is start with the local reporters, and then if we have questions from national reporters afterwards, then I'll call on you too. So if you're a local news outlet, if you throw your hand in the air, and I'll try to call on you. Sir, right there.
Hi, Daniel Gomez, WEAU 13 News here in Eau Claire. So we just talked about the border and everything and talked about addiction. You know, here in Eau Claire, earlier, like 5 months ago, we lost 2 hospitals, including an addiction resource center.
Great question.
As well. And as you know, Eau Claire County voted blue in the 2020 election, voting for Biden. So what can you tell Wisconsinites here in Eau Claire County in western Wisconsin who are battling addiction, who are battling these sort of things with such limited resources? What can you tell them to help us, see your way and see that you guys are the rightful choice here, even just without even mentioning the border, because we're far away from the Mexican border, but what can you do for Wisconsinites up here in the upper Northwest?
So we are far away from the Mexican border, of course, but we're not far away from the fentanyl that Mexican drug cartels bring into communities like Eau Claire. And that's why I talk about it. Every state is now a border state because every state is affected by the problems. But particularly on this question about hospitals and how do we actually reinvigorate hospitals in some of our small towns and more rural areas in our country, I think there are two answers to this question. One goes directly to the immigration problem and one doesn't. Look, first of all, we need to actually invest in our hospital system. We've seen since Obamacare was passed, we've seen a lot of rural hospitals in small towns close down. You cannot have a good healthcare system. You're never going to help people beat addiction if they've got to drive 90 minutes to the closest hospital. So we've got to preserve the rural healthcare infrastructure that exists in this country. And this is where the illegal immigration issue bears on it directly, because we know that Kamala Harris wants to give healthcare benefits, sometimes Medicaid, sometimes Medicare to illegal aliens. We also know that when illegal aliens come in, they have to be housed in the jails sometimes, or they have to be housed somewhere else if they're not committing crimes. That costs local taxpayer money. We know they have to be fed. That costs local taxpayer monies. We know that they have to be provided shelter, right? That costs money. And you combine all those things, those are tax dollars that are not going to build out our rural hospital infrastructure and support our hospitals. They're going to people who shouldn't be here. Maybe they're good people, but they shouldn't be here, and we've got to put the interests of our citizens first. That starts with prioritizing things like hospitals, medical services, food and shelter, that stuff. I want us to be a generous country. And I know Donald Trump wants us to be a generous country, but that generosity starts with investing in American citizens and people who have the right to be here. Sir.
I don't know if you saw, but there's a poll from Marquette University that came out earlier today. It shows a virtual tie between former President Trump and Vice President Harris. There's an old saying in politics that what can swing undecided voters in a place like Wisconsin is whether you seem like somebody they would like to have a beer with.
Yeah.
Why would people in Wisconsin want to have a beer with you?
Well, I guess they'd want to have a beer with me because I actually do like to drink beer, and I probably like to drink beer a little bit too much, but that's okay. I'm sure the media won't give me too much crap over that. But look, I mean, the reason I'm doing this, and the reason I think Donald Trump is doing this, and I think the media often slanders him, but I've never met a guy who likes normal people more than Donald Trump. I've never met a guy who, when he's got a big decision to make, he will solicit feedback from every single person all over the country. It's funny, when he was actually thinking about who was going to be his vice presidential running mate, I met with him actually the morning of the attempted assassination. It was Saturday morning. And he said, JD, everybody's asking me what I am going to do for VP, and I'm asking everybody. He said, in fact, this morning, I talked to the gardener at Mar-a-Lago. And I said, well, sir, what did the Mar-a-Lago gardener say? Right? This bears directly on my life. I'm very curious here. And look, I'm very much the same way. I mean, I like the people of this country. I like people who work hard and play by the rules. I like people who just want to take their kids to a ball game or invest in their community or spend a little time watching TV and making the things that actually make this country work. They do it, and they do it right here in this factory, and the people behind me do it every single day. And I think that to lead this country, you should feel some gratitude for it, and you should feel some admiration for the people who actually make the country run. And I will say sometimes I hear Kamala Harris, and she talks about the history of this country, and she likes to put it down a little bit. I don't know that she actually admires the people who work in this factory. I hope that she does, but I don't really see that gratitude. I don't really hear that gratitude when she speaks. I certainly do, and I think that that's one of the reasons why I'd make a good vice president, is because I actually care about the people standing behind me, and I think they feel like I care for them, and I think they care for me too. Remember, start local, ma'am, in the red?
Governor Waltz has said that he cannot wait to debate you. Your reaction to that, and is there one issue that you would really like to debate him on?
Minneapolis here. We're trying to focus on Wisconsin, but I'm sure your reach, I guess, spreads across the border, so we'll answer the question. Look, I think I want to debate Governor Waltz because nothing to do with Governor Waltz, but because the American people deserve to see the people who want to be their vice president stand before them and try to persuade them. And it's one of the things that's really frustrated me about Kamala's campaign is that she seems totally uninterested in actually talking to American voters and persuading them. If there's a single issue around which I think Governor Waltz has to answer when it comes to his record, this is a guy who says that he stands for public safety, but actively encouraged the rioters who burned down Minneapolis. And I think that if you want to say you stand for public safety, you cannot look the American people in the eye and say, well, I welcome the people who caused $13 billion of damage to Minneapolis because I encouraged them to burn my city to the ground rather than exercise some basic self-control and rather encourage law enforcement to do what they can do and keep us all safe. I'm scandalized by this guy pretending that he stands for working people. Working people need to live in communities with public safety. Working people need to be able to build a business and know that some hoodlum isn't going to come along and burn it to the ground because of a political issue. Working people need the police to be supported in their communities, and Governor Waltz has been a total failure on all those things.